Hello, everyone, and welcome to Real Property Pros and Cons episode 10, which I know because I checked on my calendar and I saw that it was episode 10, which is really awesome. We are now in the double digits, which means that, I don't know, we've successfully brought on 10 different people who want to chat about real estate, which for me, I feel is actually a pretty awesome accomplishment. So, as you know, I usually start with some sort of random story that I saw. And I saw a story on Business Insider that says 3 reasons why you shouldn't wait until you're debt free to invest, which maybe is a little counterintuitive. I think a lot of people feel like, hey, you should have no debt and then you can start making money. But one of the points that the article made was that if you have low interest debt, I mean, like not credit card debt, so, not 20, 30%, but like, 6%, maybe 3%, a student loan, something like that. If you take $30,000 to pay it off, sure, that's great. You don't have the debt. But on the other hand, if you still have the debt and you invest the money in something that can grow at more than your interest rate, then you're actually making money. And I don't know, I thought that was really interesting. And given what's been going on in the real estate market recently, maybe we want to consider investing in real estate. And what are the expected returns in real estate? What are real estate investors doing to make money? And so I thought, hey, after seeing this article, what better person than a really awesome and amazing real estate investor who has done almost $1 billion in deals over his career, or more accurately, who has done $750 million with a B deals in his career. And I was like, hey, you want to come here and chat about the real estate market and doing deals and investing? And he was like, sure. And I was like, okay. And so that is who our guest is going to be today. Um, and we will be back with our guest after a really short break. Hello, we have our guest here today, Andy McMullen. Andy McMullen is a fund manager at Legacy Acquisitions, which is focused on partnering with world class operators while delivering white glove service to its investors. These are two words, many words that I think Andy will define for us in this hour. Andy values his long-standing personal relationships with brokers, operators, institutional lenders, private equity, and has equity firms, and has orchestrated over $750 million in commercial real estate transactions over a 20-year career. Andy graduated from UCLA with a degree in economics, which means he's not afraid of numbers. He is on the board of advisors for a number of top flight companies across the United States and is active in many community and national organizations. When not searching for deals, which I'm pretty sure is a full-time, job with overtime, he enjoys spending time at home in San Diego with his wife and 3 children. So thank you, Andy, for taking time away from your wife and amazing children and deal searching to be with us
Yeah.
today.
I had to lock the door because when that music starts pumping, you have like the best intro. Like they're all gonna come in, rush it in, and just want to groove. So I know it looks a little silly, an old man dancing, but that music's just so awesome.
Well, thank
Really
you. I
honored to be here.
appreciate that.
Yeah, man, it's an honor to be here, hanging out with you again. I always love chopping it up with you about whatever you think will be valuable to your audience. As you mentioned, I've been in the real estate game for a while. I've seen a lot of myself. Just forget about what other people I've seen. I've made a lot of mistakes in my life that resonated with me your story because I have this disagreement with my wife on it's almost consistently as we are building equity and that equity stays in a property, it is worth zero, right? The return on equity is zero. So if I can get that money out and have it invest in something else that's paying 8, 12, 15%, isn't that better than trying to pay off a student loan that's 3% or whatever that is, or a home equity line, whatever that is. So I think that's kind of where we'll start. And I think you and I at one time had a podcast episode or a discussion about pulling equity out of the house. The market's changed a little bit and that interest increases, but the idea remains the same, that you got to be consistently checking what your return on equity is. And if it's sitting there in an inflationary market like now, where you're basically blowing up 8 or 9% of that equity in your house every year, why not put that on the bank's balance sheet and let them mess with the inflation? So anyways, I just thought that I'd hit on that. We can move on whenever you want.
Well, I think that actually is a really valid and interesting point that you're making. And I wonder, it seems like you have this interesting mindset about money, which is money is supposed to work, right? And if your money's not working, why is it there? Very, different from your children. But
yeah, that's true. Like if I could say, hey, look, this just isn't working. Sorry, Ava. You said you were going to be in that 8%. Now with taxes, all the rest of it, I think we're going to have to promote your sister to getting her meal today. But
exactly.
there is something though. When I was investing in my younger days, just in the stock market or options, I did options for a little while, and you would sit on these stocks or these options and just wait for it to come back, right? Because you were just hoping that you would turn around. It's almost like a bet, but that money, like you said, is not doing anything for you. So you have to consider it at this point in time. That's a loser, but that money that you still have stuck in that loser could be used on something that allows you to win. So you kind of have to consider that. And it's much easier said than done. Anybody who's ever bet, I was just at the horse races last week. Anybody that's ever bet on anything, you watch, and it's your entire visceral, everything in your body feels the loss, right? And the excitement of the win is maybe just a little bit more than what you felt before, but the loss, like that's the part that I remember. So I understand the psyche, but that's the part we really try to talk about, is let's separate the emotion and the sentiment. Let's just try to dig into the data.
Yeah, I think that's a valid point. And actually, given my background in neuroscience, I don't remember what article I was reading, but essentially the article said, if you experience a loss, it takes twice as much win to offset that loss. So basically that means if you lose $1, you need to make $2 in order to feel like that loss of $1 was worth it. So
absolutely. And I would even argue that maybe, it's a 4-to-1 ratio, right? Because if anybody who's running a business understands, you've got your top line revenue, right? And then you've got all of your expenses that trickle down to maybe you taking away 20% of your business. So for every expense that you make, you've got to really multiply that by 4. So if I'm betting on a horse for $100, am I willing to lose that because that money is going to be trickling down from my top line all the way to, am I going to basically take that out of the bottom line? Is that horse worth betting a $400 for? Probably not. So if you kind of think about those expenses in that way, it really kind of changes, like, oh, this is the way that, Warren Buffett thinks about his dollar, right? And so, and my dad, he was a basketball coach, a college basketball coach. And I've asked him many times about, he's won some championships or league titles or these great wins. And I asked him about those, and he's like, I don't remember any of those. I only remember those crazy losses that I had, right? Which is kind of that's kind of just, unfortunately, the way that we think about, it's the way that he built us.
Exactly. I think that's a really, good and bad. Like, I think on some level, it's good that we need more loss or more win to offset a loss, because otherwise, big losses, or depending on, whatever you think about it, but like, at least for our current existence, the big loss is death, right? So we really want to avoid dying and doing really bad things that make us die, right? And so, whatever neurological systems exist to stop us from dying are actually very good in the long run, right?
Indeed, right? And then we kind of have to determine these controls because we know that this human psyche is built this way. So let's put in some backstops so that we don't hit that. If we're going to be investing, this guy has to be our criteria, and let's not try to underwrite the deal in such a way that we're just trying to plug in numbers to make it seem like it's something work, because that was our original perception. Let's take the data, throw it in there, and follow the money, right? It's kind of like those old detective gumshoe shows that you would watch. You really want to know who's responsible for this thing or not. You have to determine whether you're willing to go there or not. So
exactly, I think that's a really valid point. And I guess one of the questions that I have is what you're talking about has a lot to do with mindset and how people think about money and people's relationships with money. And what might somebody be able to do to develop that kind of relationship with your money that apparently your wife does not have?
Yeah, so she's come around on a lot of things, and don't get me wrong, she's been supportive of what I've done for we've been together going on, we're going on 20 years now, together, and married about 15. So she supports real estate. She understands it.
Congratulations.
She gets it. But when you're talking about, hey, this is my nest, this is where the kids lay their head, you telling me that you want to take some money out of our house and put it in some of these other, taking it out of some of your real estate investment, that's something else. But even though it makes sense that you shouldn't have all this equity that's basically losing its valuation, inflation, it's different when it's your home, right? And you're the last thing people, my wife, I'm sure a lot of other people, if they think about, hey, what's the worst case scenario? Andy loses everybody's money. At least we still have this house, maybe with some equity in it, right? And so I think, to answer your question, I think you kind of have to set up these. I don't know. We use kind of an operating system, which we call the entrepreneurial operating system for our group as a collective, and we have this scorecard, and we kind of set up these parameters. And if it doesn't follow these parameters, then there's got to be a reason why, or a really compelling argument to deviate from whatever you've previously set up. And that's the best kind of option traders in the world and investors in the world. They have their criteria, and then it's kind of constantly stress tested. And part of the reason for that is so that we can combat our inner demons with this guy on the shoulder saying, oh, we can make so much dough on this if we just kind of stretch our parameters a little bit. And I'm not saying never, because it's always evolving, and you're always kind of acclimating to market forces. But if you can kind of think about it from this is why we had set it this way, and we're only going to change it if we've got enough new data in, that supports that change. Anyways, don't give me, you get me going, man. You should give me like a little clock to a time limit.
Well, it's great. No, I think that's great, and I think that's really helpful. And it sounds like kind of you having had a degree in economics really helps you understand the numbers and the money and what these numbers and symbols and signs and equations kind of mean. Or do you feel like
I do. I think I'm curious about economics, right? I read a lot of the journals, but I don't think of myself I don't think of that as my strength. We've got people on the team that do the underwriting. I like to think kind of in a macro, like if I'm kind of looking at everything from 30,000 feet, does it make sense? And I'll give you an example. I think this market, if you were to turn on CNBC, or you were to read some of the kind of narrative articles in the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, whatever, you would have a very different kind of view, a narrative, which is from one side of the aisle, you would have, oh, this administration, this administration doesn't know what they're doing, and now we've got inflation that's running away, et cetera, et cetera. And then you got another side of the aisle who's on the president's side, and they're saying, hey, look, let's throw him under the bus because this makes sense for everybody else for midterm and et cetera, et cetera. And then when you look at the data, just from a high level, from an economic level, you talk to economists, or you read economists, the market in general, there's a lot of great signs moving forward. I mean, the used car prices are down, right? They were out of control. The price of freight, costs are significantly down. Those were out of control. Commodities are down. I just finally got gas for under $6. Um, so I mean, you kind of look at all of these things, and so there's the sentiment part, and then there's the data part, and sometimes the sentiment is so powerful that it's going to that it's going to overpower the data. But I try to see things where they are, and then kind of consider, maybe yes, depending on which economist you talk to, we're in a recession, right? 2 negative quarters of GDP. Others would say, yeah, it's just got to be below whatever the stasis is. But to me, that's not really the right question. The right question is this like 2008 or is this like 2001, right? Which was probably, if you look back, that was a recession for that year, but we bounced back. We still had consumption. We still had, aggregate demand, etc. So that's the kind of way that I'm looking at it now. Headline inflation is going to be high because real estate costs are high. As you know, real estate prices are high. But what's happening with the huge buttloads of money that people still have sitting at home, right? From the $6 trillion that was basically infused in the economy, $1 trillion went to the corporate that's just sitting in their coffers, right? It's just sitting in reserves. $1 trillion is sitting above reserves with the Fed, and then $4 trillion is sitting in households, right? So if we really are stretched that thin, that's $4 trillion. I mean, let's just say that, the Fed decided to put their, reserves of $4 trillion out, $500 billion would be, $20 million of real estate and assets that could be purchased. So I think that there's a lot of people are afraid of what they've heard and what's happening. But I think that there's a lot more signs that there's still a lot of money that's just basically sitting in cash. If we were really struggling, it wouldn't be sitting in cash. So anyways, you shouldn't have asked me about economics because
but I think you make a really somewhat interesting point, at least in terms of economics, which is that at least from what I can see, yes, gas is more expensive, food is more expensive. If I go to the grocery store, it's more expensive. On the other hand, at least, in the groups of people that I run with, I don't necessarily hear this many stories of like, I'm making this choice because of these prices. It's, I don't want to pay this for this thing,
right.
But it's not like a choice between, do I buy gas or do I buy food? It's
right.
really just kind of like I can't buy now, gas costs X amount and I, have to spend more, but it's not. And so I wonder, so the two questions that I have for you, which you may or may not be able to answer, the first one is, if you're thinking about sort of the experience versus the headlines, is there really a difference? Like, are the headlines driving sort of this emotion, whereas the experience is the same? And the second question that I have is, if this money is just sitting there, kind of lazy money, what happens to it? What is it going to do?
I think it's a great question, and I think it's summed up with fear versus greed, right? So in the short term, fear is likely going to win out, right? We remember what we felt like in March of 2020, right? That fear is overcome. The sky is falling, and who knows what this world would see it 2022 in July going into August. But at some point, greed wins out, right? So if there's all of this cash and consistently the data comes back that Target and Walmart, all of their inventories now, they're slashing prices. So that's obviously going to bring down inflation. We develop projects in the Southeast. So, lumber a year ago was at like, I don't know, 1,600 per square foot, per foot board. Now it's like 500, which is almost back to where it was pre-COVID levels. Concrete's up a little bit, but aluminum, tin, all the steel, everything is mostly down, including labor to a certain degree, probably because a lot of people have kind of stopped building. So to get back to your question, which I think is so good, it almost doesn't matter, right? In the stock market, it really doesn't, right? Because if you've got your technical analysis, and you guys can kind of try and play where they think things are going to go per the chart, but ultimately that's a completely different animal. It's what people actually think is the most important thing. But I think when you're considering about the economy and something, if we've got 22 trillion in GDP, and it's kind of like what's his name? Linneman, Peter Linneman, I think, is economist, and so he talks about like just the sheer force of Niagara Falls, right? That like the United States, just the sheer force of the economy, like maybe it'll slow a little bit at some point, but it's basically overcome with people that want to have their assets placed. So I think at some point greed is going to win out. And the other thing that I think is, like, if you think about money versus brains, right? There's like this correlation at some point, like the dumb money kind of, there's a lot of dummies out, and it's not even like a dumb smart thing, but it's kind of like, Andy, if he gets, $100 million, in a few years, at some point, I'm obviously, they're much dumber, right? My money, I'm much dumber than the money that I get. And so I don't think we're seeing that right now. I think what we're seeing is like $4 trillion in homes that are just sitting on the cash from either, COVID or their jobs, or they're basically, I mean, they're still going back to work, which is another thing that we keep hearing, that people aren't going back to work. But I mean, since COVID, it's like, I don't know, $2.7 million, 2.7 million jobs. So I just think that the dumb money, it's not dumb money at this point, right? At some point, there's going to be so much money and people will make dumb decisions. Right now, people are really kind of being pretty smart about just saving. And so eventually that money will get back to working into the economy.
That's a really interesting point of sort of dumb money versus smart money. And,
it's not even like dummies versus smarties. It's like,
no, it's
at
not.
some
It's
point, no matter how much money, Frantz is going to be, even though Frantz is this brilliant genius, at some point, that money that he's got is too much for his brains, right? And it's because he's like, oh, now I got 100 million, I can just do whatever I want, So it's really kind of like that, whatever that relationship would be to those two.
Right. And I also think that, if I had $100 million, I would probably hire an asset manager to help me figure out what to do with that $100 million, so that I, maybe don't continue to have $100 million, but I can at least continue to live in a way that makes sense for the money that I have. Right. And I definitely think that when we've seen previous recessions, a lot of those previous recessions were the result of, people overvaluing something, and then afterwards basically throwing money at it, and then the people who had that something that people were throwing money at essentially not sort of giving the proper care and nurturing that thing needed. So you basically just like put a fire hose on the lawn and then drowned out the lawn.
Yes. And I think that's part of maybe why we're in a little bit different than 2008, right? Is because these people that you've sold houses to over the years, they've still got a lot of equity in their homes. And just generally, there hasn't been a whole lot of building, right? So there hasn't been a whole lot of, there's the oversupply issue that we saw in the mid-90s or even part of the 2000s. And there's been quantitative easing. So a lot of the lenders have been pretty disciplined in who they're giving loans to. So those things right there kind of lead you to, yeah, of course, there's going to be corrections here and there. But I don't see, I don't see a run up in and if anything, that's part of the reason that we like to build to rent so much, is because, one, we just don't think that there's enough supply in many of these communities, to support, a lot of people they're priced out of the market to buy, but even those that could buy, they want newer stuff and they want bigger backyards, and they don't want people living on above them or below them. And so we're kind of making a bet that suburbanization, though it's been going on since pre-COVID, will continue, and that people would, like you and me, I'm about 10 years ahead. So you probably, as a millennial, your American dream isn't the same as mine was, to have the house and, picket fence, etc. And a lot of the millennials and Gen Z, it's like, hey, look, I want to travel, man. I want the freedom. I want new stuff. I can buy companies if I want, or interesting companies on my phone. Do I really need to live in a house that's 30 years old if I can rent something, that's cool in a cool community that doesn't have the same kind of, same kind of, I don't know. I don't know what you would call it. Maybe it's a stigma of, renters of old in the neighborhood of, a bunch of people that own. You're all in this one community where you got amenities and the like. So anyways, I just think that there's kind of that's part of the reason that I feel like it's what we're seeing is a little closer to like 2001 or 2 than it is to something catastrophic like in 2008. I was on my ass with development stuff. We had a couple of strokes of good luck, but really, if you think about the market, didn't come back till 2012. I just can't imagine we're in that state right now.
Yeah, and I do wonder, since you're talking about this now from the investor perspective, do you have a sense of why that shift is happening? Do you have a sense of why people are shifting away from wanting to own real estate to owning other things? And to what extent do you think that 2008 has sort of jaded or impacted millennials in seeing that, this thing that a lot of people put a lot of stock in actually is not as bulletproof as people thought it was?
100%, man. I mean, I think if you're a millennial, you are likely living in the house watching your parents' net worth go up in flames, right? And if it wasn't their net worth in their home, it was in the market, right, in their 401k. And so I think people in general, and this has been going on for a while. So I think COVID obviously accelerated with the idea about being next to people, etc. But yeah, I think that there's, if I'm a empty nester, I don't want to have to do anything except maybe change a light bulb. But I also don't want, my neighbor Jim pounding on the ceiling above me, and then there's people that are living right close to me. I'd love to have my own backyard and have it managed. And I think, to your point, like if I'm a millennial and I could live in an old house at these prices now, where I know I'm going to be paying more in taxes. In fact, the disparity, believe it or not, as high as rents are, the disparity between what your cost for your mortgage, expenses, all of your upkeep, the disparity between that and your rent now is as high as it's ever been. So even if you were to say, hey, look, there's millennials that could afford to live in a home that's maybe built in the 80s or 90s or early 2000s, why, if they could have the tech package and turn on their air conditioning from their car and you have the security in the big backyard, why would they, and maybe try out a community and work from somewhere where they pay $2,400 a month in rent, and then their our office is an hour away? It seems like a pretty enticing opportunity for people. And by the way, Wall Street agrees, right? I mean, Blackstone, BlackRock, a lot of the home builders, DR Horton, DSLD, Lennar, guys that were building only for built to sale, are now saying, hey, look, let's bet on this, because now we can give our investors all these funds, CalPERS and CalSTRS and all the rest of them. Now we can give them a yield, and we've got the opportunity for the rents to go up for more yield, or the valuation of these places to go up, because a lot of it's based on income. So I definitely think we're in the early innings, Franz. I mean, of the rental market, built to rent is probably less than 2%. But what I'm saying is that I think we've seen the trend already about the kind of, as you mentioned, the psyche of the way that the younger generations thinks about the asset that you're living in. And it's been inculcated in their head by their parents and the media and everybody else. This is not an asset. This is where you live. Now you could take that money out and turning into an asset, but if you're putting this as your nest egg, you're at risk of watching that, like your parents, blew up in thin air in 2008.
And I guess the thing that I kind of wonder about is, well, I wonder two things. The first thing is, is at least from the investor side, are you really seeing that people are thinking about real estate and real property as an income source, and sort of the place to live is just a place to live and you're going to have to pay for it anyway? And also my other question is, how do we, I guess, how do we reconcile this question over real estate being an extremely good investment if you're able to afford it, and sort of creating a new paradigm where people are not owning that asset but instead are renting it out? So you're kind of creating something where you continue to own it instead of sort of sharing the wealth in some sense.
Yeah, and by the way, my wife would say, "Hey, look, if you want, if you want to buy us a new house and near where Franz lives, and we want to rent this place out, that's fine. We can do that, even though I know that would be far less in income or net income than maybe taking that same money and putting it into a multi-unit property or
Right.
land that we could turn into something else." But I think what you're saying is interesting in the fact that, like, if you're in San Diego and you buy a home and you hold it, even though if you might have some kind of dip at some point, or even now, let's just say that we're at the top of the market, it will dip, but it will come back eventually. If that's your home, you're living there, you're raising kids, they're going to school, they've got your friends, that's your home. You might have some appreciation that comes with it, but you're also going to be paying for upkeep. You're also going to be paying the taxes, et cetera, et cetera. If you're a young couple who's basically just getting married, and Pop says, "Hey, look, I'd rather, either pay for your wedding or give you a house or give you this property that's an investment property," I think most people would say today, "Get me in a new neighborhood with new tech that's cool in an area that I can work from home or whatever that is, and let me invest in a fourplex or a short-term rental, right, where I've got income coming in, and maybe at some point in my life, I don't have to listen to a boss like you, Dad, for a watch that you're never going to use. I can have independence of income that's coming in from properties or other investments that is greater than what I would make at a regular job. And even if I like my job, I still, even if I'm an engineer or attorney or whatever that still loves its job, I know that I've basically got this investment property that's not, I don't have to count on it whether it's appreciating or not, because I know I'm getting a tax write-off, I'm getting bonus depreciation that maybe we can go into that at some point in the future, but that might be 70% against any passive gains that I got. You're saying that I could also get cash flow. You're saying it's also a hedge against inflation, and then I've got a loan that's paying down principal. So you're saying I've got all of those opportunities in a property, a rental property, to make that kind of money, or I can kind of live, with the yuppies in one neighborhood where I'm barely afloat. I think the kind of idea of, like, we got to own stuff to a certain degree has been, we used to have cars. We used to want to own the cars. Right now, it's almost like if you're leasing a car, why wouldn't you just, Uber around if you're in some areas? Or so I just think that the mindset changes with every generation. And I think the older generations that are holding on to this idea, well, of course you want to live in San Diego and own a home that's 40 years old. It's going to appreciate, and you're living in San Diego. And some of the younger generations are like, yeah, that's great, but I could live from anywhere, work from anywhere, travel to anywhere. I can invest in anything. I can invest on, REITs and companies, etc. So anyways,
I guess
maybe you cut that out. I don't know. Maybe I go on too long. I don't know.
Well, I have no idea. Well, it's also live, so somebody's watching it. But
okay, yeah. So they should have like a little gong or something. Like, enough of that. Let's move
well,
on.
I also find what you're saying to be interesting. And so that's why I'm not interrupting you. If I didn't think it was interesting, I would be like, Andy.
Enough. Yeah, that's true. You would. That's true. You would actually, and you've done that many times before, so I get it. I'm good.
Yeah, exactly. No, but I mean, one of the questions that I actually have is, this idea of generating money, at least through real estate, if the idea is, or if the goal is to sort of make money on top of money, then what is the incentive to make money on top of money if you're never really going to own anything?
Oh, interesting. Meaning, if the idea is just cash flow from another business, or it, and basically you're not owning it. What's the point? It's that you're basically owning just the income stream. It's not even anything other than that. Was that what you're asking?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think what I'm saying, or at least in this proposed model where people don't own their home, or people don't own their car, or people don't own a whole bunch of stuff that they have, then
Yeah.
what is the incentive to actually earn, right?
Right.
Because part of the way that our sort of society tax structure is, a lot of inheritance um, paradigms, a lot of these aspects are created to privilege or benefit people who own stuff and then afterwards can give it to other people. But
Yeah.
then if you really just own a business, or if you own a business, you own an income stream and you don't own any other stuff, then are we creating a society that's sort of ephemeral like humanity is?
Yeah, well, I think that there's a difference, because I'm not saying not owning. I'm saying that it's becoming a renter's market, right? I'm saying, like, and the data would support that. In the 50s, let's say it was maybe 65. I don't know. You probably know the numbers, but basically the idea of ownership has fallen significantly over the last, and really since COVID, but even before then. So maybe it's a couple points a year. While the population goes up, the amount of renters goes up still, and so we still don't have that supply. So what I'm actually getting at is, own things that you're not necessarily needing to live in. That's really my point. And so, for example, we're developing projects in Southeast, so Alabama, Louisiana, Florida. We just finished some stuff in North Carolina. So, but the stuff that we're actually building from the ground up, we'll buy land, right? We're going to buy land. Let's just say, I'm going to give an example. So we'll buy 20 acres in Baldwin County, Alabama, kind of one of the growth areas of Foley, Alabama. We'll buy that for, let's say, $1 million. We can get it fully entitled, so approved by the city, approved by the county. Then we can basically buy the land. So we'll purchase it after we've got it pretty much entitled and approved. Then we'll get the engineering and we'll get the environmental done, right? So now we've basically created value in that property, in this land. And now we take it to the horizontal piece, where now there's a next stage. So we sell that entity that owned the land to the next entity that's going to basically build the horizontal, right? So that's the infrastructure, right. Streets, everything else, streets, walls, streets, sewer, utilities. And then once we've got that all built out, then there's a new appraisal, a new valuation, and then we're selling it to another entity that's taking it vertical, which means we're building out the units, right?
Right.
So at every stage, we're owning this, and we're never living in it, right? But we're blessing these young couples. We're buying stuff that's near good schools. We got the big backyard. We got the dog park. We got the new tech package. We got the dog trails. It's a completely different community. And now, in addition to that, it's a community that's insulated, that the municipalities care about, right? Because it's not a half-built, multifamily project, or half-built for sale community that basically has sticks in the air for 2 years. It's a fully enclosed with the pond and all the amenities. Some of them have more amenities than others, but it's a fully enclosed community that we can build one at a time, rent it, build the next one at a time, rent it. And because of that, it's adding more value to the community. So I'm just saying that there would be a lot of people that could afford to buy a house in that maybe same area or even a nicer neighborhood, but why not have this one community of renters? So in that scenario, they're owning other things. They're owning pieces of businesses. They're owning real estate. They're owning their stocks and bonds and 401ks and all that. It's just that they value less an older house that they've got to renovate.
Yeah, I think that, and I think that's a valid question. I think that's a valid question. I think it's also a valid point that people are sort of moving towards um, renting, just having a renter's market. The two questions that I would have, uh, based on that, the first is, you see it with cars. There used to be cars, which are, I guess, the thing that I like and follow. It used to be that you bought a car, you held on to it for a really long time, and you just owned the car. But now we've definitely moved to a society where we just lease cars. A lot of people lease cars instead of own them, and that allows people to own nicer cars than they might be able to own and pay for. But the other thing that it's done is it's caused pressure on automakers to keep making more interesting, cooler, fancier, nicer, more appealing cars. And I wonder if that's sustainable in the real estate market.
It's interesting. Well, I think it is for the foreseeable future, partly because there isn't a supply. So it would be like if the car industry had just basically turned themselves off for 10 years and weren't building any cars. And now people are driving around, and like I was driving the 90s version of the Pinto, which is the Escort. Like people are driving these old cars, So I do think there's a real need and supply. Now, at some point, you're right. You go into certain markets, it's saturated with basically these homes that no one ever lived in, no one ever bought, because ultimately people wanted to live in these nice neighborhoods that Frantz lives in, and there's just no supply of those types of places. So I could see that. I could see that being the case. But I go back to the kind of we're in the this is like the early innings. If this is a baseball game, we'd be like the bottom of the first, maybe going into the second inning of this kind of built to rent trend, because Wall Street controls basically 50% of the multifamily market, right? I mean, it's big institutions, own most of the multifamily real estate. They only own 2 to 3% of it, which means most of them are either kind of these scattered properties, right? Or these new development projects, provided that they can get done in these cities. And so, for example, in Foley, Alabama, when we finished getting all the entitlements and improved and all the hearings, etc., the community said, "Hey, look, we just want built for rent projects because they're insulated. We do." So they put a moratorium on any new building for single family for sale or single family or apartments, because that's kind of what they wanted. They wanted something different to the community. So I don't know that they answered your question, and I don't know that I could answer your question honestly, because I wouldn't be looking 10 years down the road. I'm really kind of thinking about how do we get through the 4 projects that we've got under contract now, done, right, and filled up and either sold to an institution, or for me, ideally, Legacy Acquisitions as their company would love to just hold on to these, continue to bless these communities, continue to bless our investors by just holding these communities for the long term. And some of that's realistic, some of them's not. We've got one that's an opportunity zone, which has its own kind of benefits. But yeah, I mean, I just see, in San Diego, your market, there's always people that want to live here, right? From all over the country, right?
Right. Exactly.
I like to try to keep that quiet. Like anybody who's from Texas, I'm like, you guys can talk about California, fine. You always have so much hubris about anytime I get on a call, it's like Dallas this or Texas this, and Californians are stupid. And then they come out here and they don't want to leave. Now, I don't know if that does make us stupid, that we pay 14% more in state taxes than they do. Probably does. But we live in San Diego. So,
yeah, and I mean,
San Diego, or are they from all over the place?
I'm sorry, what?
Are all the listeners from everywhere? Or are they
listeners are definitely from all over the place, primarily from San Diego. Right. One of the things that I do, there may be some Texans out there, but what I will say about your specific point is that there was a very interesting article that I read. I don't remember if it was the Wall Street Journal, but it was like one of the, big journals. And one of the things that they said was they actually sort of over time followed people who left places like California and New York and Chicago and these like big cosmopolitan cities, San Francisco, because they made a lot of money and they're like, oh, I'm going to move to Texas, I'm going to move to Florida, I'm going to move to all these places that are, that are cheaper to live in, basically lower cost of living. And what they found as they followed these people over time is, yes, when they made a ton of money and were super rich, they went to these places. When they settled down and had families and actually cared about the community that they lived in, they would move back to places that had values that aligned with where they were. So they would leave Texas and they would come back to California because, California is what California is in terms of our values and what we value. Same with New York, and it's cosmopolitan. There are more opportunities. There are more people. There's people like you who are based here looking to, have opportunities in these other places, but you're not going to be able to have contact
My
with
roots,
somebody like you.
my family and roots are here, and
Yeah.
I'm not
So
leaving. Although I would say, like, Frantz, if we're being honest, there's people on this call that are probably thinking, at what point there's got to be a tipping point, right? And I think the values and the culture and kind of the community is one thing, but when California is scaring away a lot of the commerce to some of these other areas, I think there's got to be a balance here, and that's kind of part of the hubris of California being the fourth or fifth largest economy in the world. And they're like, if we want to have, a recall and bring in, I don't know who's the top candidate right now. It's got to be somebody like the new version of Schwarzenegger. I don't know who it would be, but I think that there's just a lot of people that are in the assembly, in kind of the state senate, that just believe, guys that are entrepreneurs and trying to solve problems for communities with housing. And I know a lot of developers that would do way more than any other community because they believe in it, and they're discouraged from doing so. No, they don't want any tax credits. They don't want any favors. All they want to do is to be able to push something through that doesn't take 4 years, where it takes me in Alabama or Lafayette or wherever else in the Southeast a year to get through, some of these government restrictions. So I think that there's balance. So that's probably another topic. I know you're talking about California as a whole, and I'm talking about, entrepreneurial California, which are different things. But
yeah, but I think that those are kind of interesting points. I actually have. We are almost out of time. We have about 10 minutes left, and I had a really interesting question, which brings up an interesting point. So I'm going to move on to our last and final segment, Ask the Pro, where we'll be able to ask at least that one question. There were a couple of questions, but we'll ask that one question and talk about it because I think it's really important. So we'll be right back in a few seconds. All right. So this is a really important question asked by one of our viewers, which is, what sort of investments can small-time investors make? And the reason why this is really an important question is because, as lovely and wonderful as all of your projects are, from an investor perspective, you need to be a qualified investor, or isn't that the term? A lot of them you have to.
So yeah, what we call 506C, just basically 506 Charlie, is you have to be an accredited investor. And accredited investor would mean that person would need to have a net worth of $1 million, less their
personal home.
Right. Yeah. So their investment would be $1 million, or they had earned $200,000 or $200,000 as a single over the last 2 years, and $300,000 as a couple. So that's a 506 Charlie. Now, we also do deals that are 506 Bravo, and those would require, sophisticated investors. Those would allow sophisticated investors. So in the deal that you could only have 35 unaccredited investors, but in most deals, that's usually enough to get. So when I hear small-time investors, reality, most of us are small-time investors in the sense that, we might have a minimum of 50 grand or 25 grand, but there's nothing that says that you can't get in these rooms and partner up with people. I mean, we run a passive investing club. So basically we bring on operators and sponsors, people that present deals every week. And we decide whether collectively as a group, as a club, we want to invest in that person. Some people do, some people don't. $5,000-$10,000 on some people are putting in, some less than that. So there's opportunities like that. Fundrise, a lot of those, you can basically start to learn how to review some of these projects just on some of these kind of crowd sharing, or what would you, crowdfunding sites for real estate. Fundrise is one. There's a couple others. The other thing is, I would say if you can, check out legacyacquisitions.com. We've got a lot of resources for new investors, even experienced investors that are basically trying to figure out what cost segregation and what are all the other additional benefits. And then I'm all over LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out to me directly. But yeah, the idea of small time investors, that's most people. When you think of a syndication is basically as simple as pooling other people's money to a project, right? So, I have to put some money down. I have got to have enough net worth and liquidity to sign on a loan, right? But almost everybody else that we're bringing in is pulling together their funds so that we can buy a 250 unit or develop a 250 unit project, right? It takes a lot of equity, but almost all of those are what we call retail investors, either 506 Bravo deals or 506 Charlie deals where they're accredited. So there's so many things out there now with meetups and the like, where you can really get up to speed quickly as to what's a good deal and what's not. Oh, I lost you.
Oh, sorry. Hey, you know what? This only happened one time tonight.
Oh, okay.
Doing better.
By the way, what is that? What is the music from? You're a musician. Is that your beat, or did you take that from somebody, and where can I download it?
I do not know the answer to that question. I have a video producer, and he created all of the wonderful video stuff, and he can let you know what the awesome music is. You are the second person.
When I come back for season 2, I think you should do your keys over the top of that. And that's what I would pay for.
And then it would be a serious, substantially changed copyright, whatever thing. But I don't know exactly who the person is who asked the question, but I think, I've heard a lot of people talking about, accredited investors or those kind of like requirements as essentially foreclosing investment opportunities from people who might not have those assets. And essentially, when you have people who, one, are either have $1 million in net worth or make $200,000 or $300,000 a year, these are not people that are sort of, they're at 5 or 6 times the median income in the United States. These are not people who, on some level, are struggling, right? And so I think what you mentioned,
in California, I mean, that doesn't mean much if you're in California, right?
If you are in California, you might still be struggling, but even then, I mean, I don't know that they're like struggling. And, I think that what you talked about in terms of people pooling their assets together and coming together, and maybe, 10 people putting in $1,000 or 20 people putting in $500 sometimes might help sort of make these investment opportunities available to people, and sort of give people an opportunity to, have access to wealth building, word that I can't think of right now, essentially wealth building paradigms or wealth building systems that, have been available to certain groups of people for a really long time, but really were not available to other people. So as you said, so
And
long as
what I think is it's so key what you say, because like anything that we do, right, there's kind of, these things seem so foreign and out of focus. If I had to change my background here, I can't do it. But because I was going to say that, they come into focus and you start to see how accessible many of these things are, right? Great operators, you understand in underwriting, you look at a few, you talk to some people that are in the business, and almost like anything else, it kind of triangulates into kind of this understanding. Yeah, there's always jargon, there's always, you know, you know, there's tons of kind of underwriters who will be able to disguise things here and there, but I think in general it's much more accessible. And if you wanted today to say, hey, I'm going to just put $200 a month, but I'm going to go on Fundrise and I'm going to look at all the deals that are in that 15 to 20% IRR, and I'm going to compare them, and then I'm going to call Andy and say, hey, look, I've done a little bit of homework, can you help me with maybe your model, or maybe you can have your team kind of help me understand where is it that some of these operators kind of sneak things in? Is it, the exit cap rate? And I don't want to get into all the details of some of these terms to confuse people, but there's people that like me that want to help. And I think that I'm not, it's not just me. I recognize, like Frantz recognized, that he didn't get to where he was without some help. Right. And obviously he asked for it, and obviously he was talented and he was smart and he was great with people, and there were some skills, but he couldn't do it by himself. And that's exactly what the real estate business is. It is about relationships, and it's about working with other people. Frantz talks a lot about collaboration. I've been in some of his groups because that's such an important piece of how we grow, just as individuals, but collectively, how the 1 + 1 = 3 idea. And so I just think there's a lot more accessible opportunities for people than there were before.
Yeah, I think that's a really important and valuable point. And I will say, since most of my guests, I bring them on, and these are magical people who show up, and I don't really talk about how I know them, but like I have worked with Andy. I know Andy, and he really is somebody who wants to help other people, help others, help people understand how to develop themselves in the ways that they want to develop. And I think that's incredibly valuable. And Andy is obviously here as a resource, but I really do think that there are a lot of people who are willing to provide the help, are willing to provide the insights that you as a listener might need in order to become more successful. But they're not going to. I'm a busy person. Andy's a busy person. A lot of people are very willing to help and provide their time, but they're not going to do it without you asking. So where you might find yourself in a situation in other circumstances where people will kind of force the help on you and be like, well, you need help, so I am going to help you. And here, let me help you. People like, really frankly, myself or Andy, if you say, hey, I need help, can you help me? We're generally more than willing to say yes. On the other hand, we're not going to go out of our way to find people to help, because frankly, we have other things to do with our time.
And there's a lot of there's but it's such a good point that you bring up, because I think when the younger version of myself was a little bit afraid of kind of asking a dumb question or whatever. Eventually you realize that you're an idiot for a moment or two, and then you got the answer, and now you can move on to the wisdom part, right? But I do think that, especially now in this inflationary climate, Frantz, where people, if they decide to sit on their money, they may leave their job as an engineer or whatever they do, and they've got a predictable income. That money that's not being reallocated into something like what you do or what I do or what some of the other people in this community do by investing it is losing 7, 8, 9% per year. And so some people might be okay with that dollar that you've got today is worth 90%, next year, because at least that it didn't go down in the stock market to 50 or 40 or 30. But I think that there is safe harbor investments that you can put your money into that will allow you to basically not worry about that money on your mattress just completely, 10% being stolen right from out from under you every year.
Absolutely. I think that's a valid point. Well, thank you so much for being with us, Andy. It is now 7 o'clock or 10 o'clock or wherever you are. It is the top of the hour. So I really want to say thank you to Andy. I'm going to put your name up there and legacyacquisitions.com, which is your website. I definitely recommend reaching out to Andy. He has helped some of my own clients with what they do. And I will see you all next week with another Real Estate Pro.
What an honor. Thank you, man.
Sorry about that.
That's
all right. Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for being with us, Andy. Bye-bye.